I think what really got me into MMIW and being so active is knowing that at 12 years old, my mother was found dead in a washing machine.
Oh wow.
And nobody wanted to look into it. They tried to say, well, it was just a random death. Like, no, I was born at night, not last night. And you're not going to tell my 12-year-old self that, like, she put herself there. Like, I'm stupid sometimes, but I'm not a complete idiot. Like, I can tell that she didn't put herself in that position. She couldn't have physically. So I think that was kind of the turning point, especially as I got to be an adult and I was raising my kid who's close to the same age that I was when I lost my mother. And my kid has not had any of the traumas that I had growing up, and I'm quite thankful for that. But it's like, as a parent now, looking back on what happened to me as a kid and carrying around that intergenerational trauma, when you see it happen on your own doorstep, you want to step in and do something about it. Like, if you physically can, like if you have the time and you have the spoons and all of that, like, go step in and go actively help. And it's like, I think that's kind of what drove me to start doing it more, because it literally takes 10, 15 seconds of your time to, like, post a link somewhere else. Like, it might not be in my area, but I know somebody in that area and I can shoot a message up that way. And skydivers are all over the place. So I know, like, almost every drop zone, there's somebody I know that I can call up and be like, hey, I know you're in the general area. Can you do me a favor and put up a poster or two, like, while you're there, like on a boogie or whatever? So it makes it really easy to get the information out, especially like cross country quite quickly. Um, and that's been something I've been very interested in and more of an advocate for, because we have a chance now with social media being like it is, that if it had happened now, if my mother was in this day and age and died, it would be very easy for me to figure out what happened. But as it is, when it happened in the 2000s, the early 2000s, 2002, it's like there's not a way to go back and undo that. And there's generations of it like that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not the only kid affected by this. You know, like my grandfather, he was taken from his family, and the girl that was supposed to be his sister, and they were taken away from their family in Canada and, like, given to another family. So it's like that kind of trauma sticks with you. And then, even though you don't quite look like your ancestors, like, you kind of lived it too.
That's
And then
true.
you try and fix and relearn and go back to understand your grandfather and understand your mother and, like, the mistakes that they made. And then you have that forgiveness because you held them to a different standard back in the day because you didn't understand the trauma that they had been through. Like, were they guilty of some of the things that they did? Absolutely. Does it explain why they did those things? Absolutely. Like, does it absolve them of anything? No, not necessarily, but it does make me understand why they made the decisions that they did. And it
Yeah.
makes them more real as people. And now I'm able to, as an adult, go, you know what? I forgive you for doing it that way, because I can see now you didn't have much of an option. Like, you were pretty much stuck between a rock and a hard place. I get you, fam. You get a pass on that one. But as a kid, you don't understand that, you know? Like, and it wasn't until my grandfather died that I started to understand, like, how bad it must have been for him and his sister. Because when my mother died, parents shouldn't bury their offspring. That's kind of the general consensus. You don't want to bury your children. you want to go before them because you want to make sure that they're raised and good to go. But then when my grandfather lost my mother, I saw how bad it hurt him. And then looking back on it years later, as my grandmother is starting to age and go, I made aware that my grandfather in his last years was very, not resentful, remorseful for having made some bad decisions. And not necessarily bad decisions, but decisions that just didn't turn out the way they needed to. And like, I always thought of him as an angry man. And I kind of took issue with him when I was growing up. But then as an adult, I'm like, you know what? I get it. He was going through a lot. Like, it's easy to sit there and be like, oh, forgive them. But then when I sit there and I think of all that he's been through and all that my mother went through, I'm like, you know what? No, they get a free pass. It's fine.
So you mentioned this abbreviation MMIW. What is that?
Missing and murdered Indigenous women. And a lot of times you'll also see it with MMIW 2S, which represents two spirits. So in the Indigenous community overall, the wide scope of everybody has pretty much adopted two spirit to mean somebody who has both masculine and feminine understanding of themselves in the world. So that could range from any sort of person, but generally speaking, amongst the tribes, they're a special type of person. And so two spirit do tend to go missing even higher, but it's women in two spirit that seem to go missing the most, and children as well. Indigenous men are also going missing at a much higher rate than your average population, but you'll see most of the time MMIW or MMIW2S or MMIWG2S. There's multiple abbreviations for it, but they all basically stand for the same thing, which is awareness on the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples within like the entire continental US. And I mean, even if you're looking at South America now, like they had an Indigenous woman who's been speaking out on logging efforts, I believe, and she goes missing. So one of the biggest supporters of the forest rights in that area has now gone missing. And it's not, this was planned. Like, they silenced the people that tried to stand up for the land. And it's like you're actively killing the planet and its people, like quite quickly, actually. The people that fight for the clean water and the clean air, and you're killing them. And then you're just cool with it.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes no sense.
You mentioned, we were talking about earlier, Starlight Tour, if I'm not mistaken.
Starlight tours. Yeah, I had a friend of mine, I asked her, I was like, have you ever heard of a Starlight tour? She said, no. I said, you need to look them up, because I think it's imperative that everybody, when they hear the word, they're able to Google it and understand it. This is a practice that continues to happen, like in Canada right now. They will pick up an Indigenous member and they will take them out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a blizzard or a winter storm, and they will leave them there. And oftentimes the person could be slightly intoxicated. They could be, just woken up from the middle of a sleep and dropped out in the middle of nowhere. Like, how are you gonna survive, negative 25 degrees or more, with bare minimal clothing? And it's just done. And police that get caught with it, they don't even get a slap on the wrist. They don't even really get chastised, and people are dying.
Wow. I think that's
women, children, like fathers, sons, daughters, like these are people. They're not just, I'm not even sure what they're trying to see them as. I can't understand how you would do that to anyone.
That's quite scary, because when you think about it, and I'm not saying it's all polices, but it's the fact that it's the police that's actually doing this makes it concerning, because these are the people that we turn to and trust. And who knows, like the indigenous people might be going to them saying, hey, can you help me with a situation? And the police officer could be like, oh yeah, come into my car. Well, I'm going to drive you to the station, but really, it really is a Starlight tour that they're taking them on.
And I
So
mean, that
that's,
really is a case. I mean, that can
yeah.
happen, and it does happen. And it's frightening that Americans don't know that this is happening so close to them, you know?
Mhm.
And it's like there's this weird veil over the eyes of like America bad, Canada good. Both places have problems specifically regarding missing peoples, and neither country helps any of their indigenous find their people. Like, you rarely see these missing people come up on like FBI websites. Like the girl that I went looking for, the cops knew that she was here and had even run into her once before, but then tried to put a smear campaign in the paper, basically to say that, you know, she was doing this, that, or the other and didn't want to be found. That's not true. She did want to be found. She didn't have a phone, and you guys didn't let her call home. What?
Mhm.
Like, when I found her by, so Google Earth Cam is like right on the strip, and I found her through that. And it's like the police could have at any point in time just let her call home, but they didn't.
Mhm.
Why? Like, why is it such a bother for you to help someone get home? I don't understand.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, my brain can't rationalize why they do that.
Mhm.
But her family came out and we got them hooked up and they went home and they're back together at their nation now. Like, it's nice, but it's like it was really a team effort to get everybody coordinated so that it could happen, because the family had to get their tickets to fly out here. I had to pinpoint exactly where she was,
Mhm.
like in the entire of Fremont Street. I need you to understand, like, that's a big area for somebody to be in, and to try and coordinate meeting up and being in the same place that we needed to be for her to be able to use a tourist's phone to kind of better meet up with us. Like, the police could have been so much easier of a help, and they weren't. They were like the hindering the problem. It was
So
so frustrating.
I got to ask this question now. It's how the world is turning, or I guess Canada and starting it sounds like the US is suffering with the same issue. It's why is there such a spotlight now on Indigenous? And if you notice, like a year ago or even 2 years ago, like prior to that, there wasn't really much talk.
I think a lot of it has to do with, I mean, you look at Hawaii right now. Hawaii has told for years that the Navy has been spilling petrol, gas, jet fuel, like jet fuel. Understand that they have been spilling jet fuel into the aquifer.
Mm.
And they have said for years, no, we didn't, until like Bobby's, you know, little Bobby gets chemical burns in his mouth because there's petrol in the aquifer. And the Hawaiians, the native Hawaiians, are like, we've been telling you guys that you're destroying our ecosystem. And it's like, I think it has to do with it starting to affect the majority now. And people are like, wait a minute, you mean that climate change is going to affect me? Water quality is going to affect me. It's not going to just affect some nation out in the middle of nowhere, you know, Arizona. Like, it's going to affect me here in Las Vegas. Because you have to understand, a lot of the large lakes are terminal now. People are seeing the environment dying. And Indigenous peoples have been telling you, we've been telling you this for years. Like, you're destroying the water table. Like, a lot of the farms out in California, they use the aquifer to water farms when really they shouldn't have planted them like that. And then Nestle has been stealing water for years, like literal years. They've been scoping up the groundwater and then selling it for a profit, and they didn't pay for that. They essentially stole most of the water from California and sold it. And now, like, if you go to the Hoover Dam, the water is down. Like, the lakes and rivers are running dry, and people are now aware of it. And I think with COVID, everybody being inside more, when you had the Line 3 protests kind of hit off a little bit, like it seemed to make it outside your mainstream media blackout. It hit TikTok, and then it took off, and then people were more aware of what was happening, you know, within the country to people, because we already had the Flint, Michigan water crisis, which is still being protested to this day. It's like people are starting to wake up and realize that our water is in danger. Our states are burning, for God's sake. Like, I was in Tucson last year during the Bighorn fire. I got caught in the fire. I nearly died because I went out hunting on BLM land, which is the Bureau of Land Management, and it took me, I don't know, 3 hours to hike out to this spot that I hunt at. And I started to notice that it was getting hazy in the valley. There wasn't any fire when I went, you know, like I checked the weather. I didn't see any fire, but the wind had gotten so bad that it like flew a couple of mountains away. Like the embers were carried multiple miles and landed on the mountain on the other side of me. And I was hauling butt with like 80 pounds of gear trying to run from the fire, which is really fast, by the way. If you are going to go hike out in the desert country and there might be fires, like you need to be aware of your outs and your exits, because that stuff, once it gets in like the brush, it is so fast you cannot outrun it. You can't. It like you will get caught in the embers. Like my hair burned. I had like chunks of my hair that were burned.
Wow.
And I tried to warn people. I was like, if you're going out hiking, maybe you don't. Like, at least until this fire gets put out, because you can be anywhere in Tucson, and if the wind shifts, you're screwed, because it's so dry here that like everything is just a tinderbox. Just stay indoors for right now. Don't tempt nature. She's angry right now.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. Very, very
And
true.
it was bad for almost 3 months. There was a fire, and I was coming home burnt, right? And I'm coming around the large bend in the freeway to get home, and I see the fire on the other side of the mountain, and I was like, you son of a gun. You suck. There goes my hunting, there goes my hair. What dignity I had left.
That's awesome.
So I'm like sprinting, screaming, like, help. There's nobody. You just got to be faster than the fire.
That's it. Fire and wind, you have to be faster. You're like, oh crap.
Basically. And as soon as I got to my car, the plane that drops all like the fire, you know, extinguishing stuff on it, like passed by overhead. I was like, where were you 5 minutes ago? I could have fused you.
Oh, that's awesome. Going back to MMIW, what do you want to happen? I guess, well, as trying to find the correct word to say that, like as a nation slash as a citizen of this earth,
as a survivor of it. I want more accountability from our local police departments all the way up. There's no accountability for this. We know that this is happening at a ridiculous rate. And yet, and we know the general like reasons this is happening. it's just getting pushed aside. I don't know what the correct term would be. It's like it's not even being pushed aside, it's being willfully ignored because that's easier to do. I want more accountability on it not getting pushed back. When families are like, my family member is missing, you're like, no, they're not. They've just run away. Like, I'm pretty sure you know your family well enough to know if they would run away or not. Like, especially if that's not the MO of the person that is now missing. Like, for me, for example, I tell my friend, my best friend, who's basically like my sibling, we're platonically intertwined with each other. I tell her everywhere I go, literally everywhere. I share my location because I can't always do that with my spouse because he could be working, right? But if I'm going anywhere, I have to know to let somebody be aware of where I'm going. And I need people to be aware that that is the experience of anybody who has survived MMIW.
Yeah.
Like, if you, like, for me personally, when I was a child, part of the reason that I was adopted, and I don't talk about it much because it's quite trauma inducing to most people, but like from ages 2 to 6, I was trafficked. Like, that's another reason I have like a want to bring awareness. Like, the children of these women go through so much, right? Like, my mother died at 12, but I had also been through a hell because nobody was going to help her. Like, my mom was abused by her spouse, who also abused me, and she was trying to figure a way out, but nobody was going to listen that he was abusive to her because they don't want to hear it. Now, if it had been a woman of a different color, they probably would have listened.
Yeah.
But my mom didn't look like everybody else. So there was definitely like resentment. And I never understood that growing up as a kid. Because I grew up in a weird duality, you know? I grew up seeing how the South was treating things, and my grandfather was a transplant, not by choice. You know, like, he had been ripped away from his culture. And the more I look back on his stuff and go through his things, the more I see how much he did remember, you know, of his early childhood, because he painted it. And the more I go through his things, the more I see it and the more I'm reminded. So the more I think about MMIW, I think about the deep, deep scope that it means. Like, it's not just missing women. Each of these women had a family. Then you start to spiderweb out, like, how that family impacted another family. And especially when you're very communal, you know, like, when anybody died in my family, my grandfather was always the first one to show up. Like, what's going on? Who needs help? Who needs direction? Because he was the planner of stuff. And I take a lot of that because that seems to be kind of like, you always have that in an Indigenous household. You have the planner, the person that knows what they're doing. You step back and you let that auntie or that uncle just do it. You just sit it out. Because if anybody needed to get anything done, it was my Aunt Emily, and buddy, she got it done. You just got out of her way.
I have the same thing. My mom's the same way too. If something happens, then she knows.
She's the problem solver.
Yeah, she just does it.
Well, see, and my mom was very much that way when she was younger too, you know, like, my mom was the type of woman that took nothing from no one, right? Like, she was a tough cookie. she was a nurse, and she would put men, like grown big men, in their place in the ER. She'd be like, no, you're gonna sit there and you're gonna behave. And I was like, I want that energy later in life. But you always get the strong ones. And I don't know, it's like, I look on it now and I wonder if my mom was still alive today without the trauma, like what kind of relationship would we have?
Yeah.
Like what kind of ceremonies would she be doing with my kid right now? Right? Like, would she be helping me bake? Would she be helping me make soup and like bring in my hunt and like take it down for me? You know, would she be there to do that with me? But she's not, and she can't share any of that. Like that experience is gone.
Hmm.
The best I can do is do it for my kid, who like I was teaching how to use blow darts to hunt rabbits and stuff, because it's a really neat way if you're hunting larger game to hunt small game while you're going, because you're going to be quiet anyway. So use a dart gun because it's close range. You can, you know, get the animal quite quickly and quietly. So if you're going to get a deer or a boar or, you know, some other larger game, you're not spooking the game off with a 22, you know, going hunting. You can catch, you know, up to 10 rabbits, you know, pretty easily, and save that meat for later, you know. And that scopes out a while. And my kid got to learn that, like how to do that and how to save the meat and preserve it. And it was just really a neat experience, because that was what my grandfather did with me. But now I can't do that with my mom.
Yeah.
Like I can't have her over and be like, Mom, I got a deer, you want to help me break it down? Like I can't do that. I can tell my kid, hey, you want to help me like smoke this up? But I can't call my mom over and tell her, you know, hey, I got some moose coming in, you know, I've got bear I went and hunted, you know. I can't do that. And it's like, it's such a missed opportunity, because I'm pretty sure if my mother wouldn't have died, my grandfather would still be alive.
Mhm.
And I'd have more stories, and I'd understand my family.
Yeah, and that's, you touched on a lot of things just now. And the biggest thing is it's we really have to cherish the moments that we are with our family,
Yeah,
because
because I look on it now and it's
mm,
like, I understand why my grandfather was the way he was, because
yeah.
when my mother died, I can't imagine the trauma he felt, because that was his baby girl dying. And when my mother died, a very strange thing happened in my family, because I look so much like my mother.
Mhm.
Um, and she copy pasted. She ran out of toner in me, but you know, we're working with what we got. But when she made me, I always wanted her to be proud of me. And then I remembered my grandfather when she died, what that must have been like for a parent, because now I had a kid and I was understanding what it was like being a mom. And then I get that like tug at my heartstrings of, oh my God, you know, I had it bad, but like he had it worse, because for some reason, I don't know, it's like, because she was his kid,
Mhm.
the pain would hurt more, because your kid is not supposed to die before you, like logically speaking.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it makes me think about him when I was growing up, and sad I didn't ask for more stories. But how would I have known that it was as bad as it was until I got older and I was able to understand more, and like hear from other people in the family what happened, and then start to make the understanding of what it was to take a family from one direction and throw them into an entirely different direction, and then make them evolve past that trauma.
Mm.
Like you lose who you are you lose what you are, you lose connections with where you've been, because it's all gone. Because once it goes missing, it's gone. You won't get it back.
That's true.
And especially if like your mother comes back dead and not just missing, it ripples, because it doesn't just impact me as the child, it impacts my grandfather, that's his daughter, it impacts like my cousin, that was his favorite cousin, right? Like it ripples out and it hurts so many more people, and then that leaves a trauma to the next generation, because everybody's like out of sorts, and it will tear families apart.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
Like it ripped ours a new one when my mother died. It pretty much tore the family in half,
Yeah.
because there was just a lot of things that came out of the wash. And I think if you're going to look at it, that's what happens to the majority. For every person that goes missing, it's a deeper trauma than that. It's an outward ripple to everybody in the community. Because like when my mother died, my whole town like was quiet about it. Like they heard about it. People at my school, when I came back to school, they all had written apology cards, and I was confused because I was always picked on growing up as a kid. I didn't quite fit in with everybody, and that's okay. I mean, not everybody does, but I couldn't understand why all of a sudden the kids cared.
Yeah, that kind of pisses me off, to be honest with you, sometimes. It's a lot of people, and I don't, it's the fact that people do not show that they care until something bad happens. And then after that, they only care for like a day.
Well, and it's like, it was so weird to me, because the people that had always called me names like Lizard Lady or whatever, they were now giving me sympathy cards. And again, you have to understand, I didn't cry when my mother died. Like, as traumatic as it was, and I was angry about the situation, I didn't cry, because at that point in time, I realized how bad things were. Like, trauma wise in the family, I was like, nope, I'm just going to shut up and color. Like, I'm not even going to fuss about it.